A 21-year-old millionaire was hunted down and killed by a group of people. This was just a few years after his father had succumbed to a similar fate. Were the killings of the father and son related to each other? Or did their wealth lead to their untimely demise? Did the man deserve what came to him? Or was he killed for something which was the figment of someone's imagination entirely? Let's find out today in the story of Gagandeep Singh. Hi everyone, welcome to Collectively Vigilant. I am Dr. D.
And I am Sam.
So, our story starts with a tight knit family in the southeastern part of London. And the family consisted of the patriarch Charanjit Singh, who was a self made millionaire and was born and brought up in a small village in Hoshiarpur called Atalgarh. He later migrated to the UK and eventually set up a really small business, which was an employment agency. And after that, he set up one more business and then one more. Little by little, their businesses grew. He was married to a woman called Tajinder Kaur, and they got married around the year 1987. Shortly thereafter, their son Gagandeep Singh was born in the year 1989, and then a few years after that, in 1992, Amandeep, Gagandeep's little sister, was born. Both siblings would stay at their parents' office extensively every day after they would come back from school, and both the parents had dedicated their life in running these businesses and taking care of this really small family. Gagandeep, in fact, was so helpful from a really young age with the family business that he was considered to be extraordinarily prodigious, and he would work with his mom more and more every single month. This was when he was just still 8 years old, that this actually freed up a lot of time for his father, and then the father started working on other businesses. So the family had a couple of things in their mind as a little tight knit family. They wanted to spend a lot of time with each other. They wanted their business, of course, to grow, and they wanted their children to be highly educated. And it seems like both the children were doing all three of these. And one more thing that Gagandeep was quite fond of was his religion. He was truly dedicated to it. And that's why, as a teenager, he decided that he wanted to go through Sikh baptism, which is known as Amrit Chakna. And this was a remarkably mature decision, an unusual decision, because his father did not even tie a turban, and the mother as well was an extremely faithful, dedicated Sikh, but they were modern and moderate Sikhs. So Gagandeep was going to school, so was Amandeep, the sister, and this was a lovely family, and life was going on swimmingly for them. In 2009, Gagandeep's father, Charanjit, was invited to India around Punjab to attend a wedding. Father Charanjit decided to go to India to attend the wedding of a relative, and he was staying in the Country Inn Hotel in September of 2009. While he was visiting India, he decided to go and meet his accountant friend, a man by the name of Kamal Kishore, and Charanjit had been paying Kamal Kishore money so that Kamal Kishore could buy a few parcels of land. And for this purpose, Charanjit had already paid his friend Kamal Kishore about 45,000 pounds, which is basically the equivalent of 35 lakh rupees. And Kamal Kishore, in fact, did buy four parcels of land. But little did Charanjit know that his accountant friend had bought all four pieces of land in his own family's name and not in the name of Charanjit or Charanjit's family. When Charanjit realized what had happened, he demanded that Kamal Kishore give him his money back. And Kamal Kishore, instead of repaying that money, started hatching a plan to eliminate Charanjit altogether. When he realized that Charanjit would be visiting India and the rest of his family would be back in the UK, Kamal Kishore hired killers, and he basically hired a man called Vipin Kumar. He also hired another man called Rajiv Kumar and another man called Raj Kumar. Now they all have very similar family names or identical family names, but I'm not sure if all three of them were related or not. And then, as Charanjit was staying in his country inn hotel, he was there for a couple of days. On the beck and call of Kamal Kishore, these three men ambushed Charanjit one night when he was returning to his hotel room from the festivities of the wedding, and he was ambushed and killed right outside the entrance of his hotel. Harvinder Kaur, remember, was back in the UK with Amandeep and Gagandeep, and she was just really worried because she couldn't get in touch with her husband. But little did she know that her husband had already been murdered. When the news of Charanjit's killing eventually was given to Harvinder Kaur, she had a heart attack. And as she recovered the next few days in the hospital, Harvinder Kaur, over the phone, tells her relatives, and they relay this information to the police, that Kamal Kishore had in fact cheated the family of their land and their money. So the police sets out in Punjab to begin this investigation, and Harvinder Kaur, of course, was left alone to take care of these two children who were now teenagers. At this time, Gagandeep, at the time of his father's killing, Gagandeep was around 18 years old. And as an 18-year-old, he stepped up and he became a pillar of strength for his mother and sister and assumed control of the family business. Soon thereafter, thanks to his brilliant business mind and business acumen, he started his own business along with the employment agency that he already ran for his parents. He came up with the idea of a broadcast television channel which was dedicated to the Sikh community in the UK. And that's how, by the age of 20, going towards 21, he became a self made millionaire. And we've all seen these self made millionaires, especially if people chance upon wealth early in life. It usually makes them a certain kind of person. Some people either become the kind of flashy Lamborghini bros that you see all around you, or some people are truly humble, and Gagandeep was one of them. He did not hoard wealth for himself. As a matter of fact, he was a remarkable example in the Sikh community, and as a young man, as a young boy, you can even call him a boy, he was providing free food and employment opportunities to the most downtrodden individuals who needed a second chance in life, not only through his employment agency, but through his other connections as well. He was always helping people out. And one person that he truly helped out was a person who was a boy who was basically a year his junior. You can call them young men. I interchangeably call them boys or men. Um, so this young man was a man named Harvinder Shokar, who was training to be a electrician. Now, Harvinder Shokar is a young boy, as a young man with a turban, and because of which was getting sort of he was having a hard time securing employment for himself. He was not getting as much employment opportunities as he thought he could have if he did not have a turban. So, with this sort of problem, he goes to Gagandeep Singh, who was known to be this young person who was giving everyone employment all the time. And Gagandeep, true to his nature, starts helping out Harvinder Shokar as well. And not only did he help him out, he actually became his mentor. Not only did he help Harvinder Shokar get a job, he actually took Harvinder Shokar under his wing. And as a 21-year-old himself, he was helping this 20-year-old electrician navigate his way through life, kind of became an older brother. They were constantly over at each other's house. And he was also, remember, trying to start off this broadcasting channel dedicated for the Sikh community. So he would try to spend as much time as possible doing his work and also help Harvinder Shokar out. And this did not give him much time to think about his personal life. He was just always working as a 21-year-old man. And that's when one chance meeting through Harvinder Shokar led him to a young woman, a brilliant young woman, a 19-year-old woman by the name of Mandal Mohel. Mundal too, just like Gagan, hailed from a conservative Sikh family, and she was quite smart. As a matter of fact, she was a straight A student all through school, and she was from the Chatham area in Kent in the UK and had attended the Rochester Grammar School. She later enrolled in medical school at Brighton, where she met Gagandeep Singh and through Harvinder Shokar, and this friendship truly bloomed. And Gagandeep was actually truly besotted with his new friend Mundil Mohel and constantly put her on a pedestal. At the same time, his friend Harvinder Shokar, who had actually introduced these two people, was also in love with the same woman, and this happens in so many friend circle. It's practically a cliche how often this happens. And this young woman was the object of affection of these two men, and she was poised to be a doctor someday. Now, Mundil had, as I said, met Gagandeep through Harvinder Shokar, and they had met basically at a Gurudwara festival. And he later sent her a friend's request on Facebook, and that's how these two, Mundil and Gagan, sort of grew quite close to each other. And remember, all this time he had taken care of his family. He was truly prodigious with his businesses, so he had taken everything over, especially since the passing of his father, untimely murder of his father, Charanjit Singh. So he finally thought that he had met someone in life that he was sort of, being vulnerable with. He was speaking to her all the time, sort of letting out his emotions, and she was truly helpful and such a good friend to him, and she helped him out through these challenging times. And little by little, Gagandeep developed feelings for this girl, and then he was, because he was truly fond of her. But Gagandeep's mom, being the protective matriarch who had already lost her husband, the only other male member of the family, sort of cautioned Gagandeep, and she said, well, keep away from Mundil and maintain some distance, because she had some sort of like motherly intuition that, she didn't really like that Mundil was like a pub going young Sikh woman. And we all can have our feelings about that, but that's how protective mother felt. And I think if someone in the audience is a mother themselves, they somehow can sometimes sound a little regressive when they say these things, but they mean it genuinely from the goodness of their heart. Now, by this time, remember, more and more time was being spent either over the phone or on Facebook between Gagandeep and Mundil, and Harvinder Shokar was basically sidelined. However, actually, Mundal spoke to Harvinder all the time as well, and she was keeping him as a friend as well, while she was maintaining her friendship with Gagandeep. However, between the two men, Gagandeep and Harvinder Shokar, there was kind of like a rift as well. And some people report that Harvinder Shokar was actually kind of bad mouthing Gagandeep over in their friend circles as well, and on Facebook as well. So Harvinder Shokar and Gagandeep's friendship had kind of soured by this time. I think anyone and every one of us who have been in a friend circle where there are especially three people, two people usually break out and start bad mouthing the other one, happens all the time. And especially here, because she was the common object of their affection, one can truly understand how, of course, Harvinder Shokar would have these feelings against Gagandeep, who was a remarkably talented 21-year-old who was by this time a self made millionaire and was the CEO of Sikh television. And unfortunately, Gagandeep's relationship with Mundal also soured after Mundal Mohel one day alleged that Gagandeep was trying to be physically close to her one night when he had come over to her apartment. She lived in that apartment with two of her friends, and she says that she sort of fought him off. She did not want to get close to him, which is her absolute right. And he apparently got into bed with her as she was trying to sleep one evening when he had come over. So after that, true credit to her, she after she realized that he had become a little too close for comfort, she broke off all contact with Gagandeep, and she forbid him from basically visiting her at her flat. Now, I should highlight that the information that I just gave you was from the year 2011. However, Mundal herself did a newspaper interview much later, a decade later, and she basically calls that a sexual assault. So, in the meantime, there was already a rift between Gagandeep and Harvinder Shokar because they had a common person that they loved or liked. Um, and of course, there were feelings that Harvinder Shokar had of all this jealousy, of course, towards this 21-year-old super successful person, while this person is even struggling to get or jobs, different jobs as electrician. So their relationship soured. Following this incident, Mundal ceased, as I said, all contacts with Singh, and he repeatedly tried to contact her time and time again to seek forgiveness and to reconcile. However, she did not Mundal did not formally go to the police and complain against Gagandeep, so there was no report of this with the authorities. However, there are text conversations between Gagandeep where he was constantly apologizing to her, to Mundal, and she would not respond to him. And he basically admits that he had crossed the line, is how he put it, and he deeply regretted that decision. And he was telling this, he was of course saying this over on the text to Mundal, and he even went up to several people in the Sikh temple, the Gurudwara, and he spoke to elders there and said, I completely crossed the line. I shouldn't have done that. I'm trying to apologize. So Gagandeep inundated Mundal with apologetic messages over the next 6 months. And remember, the incident happened in August of 2010. But Mundal, as is her right, she refused to accept any of his apologies or refused to meet him. And all these feelings inside Mundal were basically festering for the next 6 months, and she basically wanted to teach Gagandeep a lesson. And that's when it seems that she masterminded that Gagandeep should come over one day into her apartment, and she wanted to exact some sort of revenge on what he had done to her. And to exact that revenge on Gagandeep, Mundal Mohel reached out to her friend Harvinder Shokar, who remember was the electrician. She wanted Harvinder Shokar to exact revenge on Gagandeep. So Harvinder Shokar naturally saw this as a moment in which he could outshine Gagandeep for once in his life. And in real life, probably somebody like Harvinder Shokar probably would never be able to outshine a man like Gagandeep, who was just at the age of 21, already a millionaire, a self-made millionaire, and had at least two businesses that we know of which were thriving. So Harvinder Shokar really wanted to be Mundal Mohel's knight in shining armor, and he gladly accepted Mundal's invitation to teach Gagandeep a lesson. He further then recruits another friend of his, a man by the name of Darren Peters, and Darren Peters was supposed to help Harvinder Shokar in aiding him, in helping him teach Gagandeep a lesson, and that's something that Mundal had requested. So on 26th of February 2011, this was 6 months after Gagandeep allegedly tried to get in bed with Mundal, that she finally actually answers one of his texts on the 25th of February of 2011, and she invites him over to her apartment. And then, in response to getting that invitation, Gagandeep sends the following text message, and he says, quote, okay, can we talk civil or do you just want me dead? Question mark, unquote. So I'm not sure what was the response to this invitation, or what was the response. I'm not sure what was the response to this text message. But on the 26th of February of 2011, around 7 p.m., Gagandeep left his home in his sister's blue Mercedes and headed straight to a convenience store to buy a teddy bear. And Gagandeep also let a friend of his know that he was going to go and meet Mundal Mohel. The friend actually could hear Gagandeep's nervous anticipation over the phone, and Gagandeep did tell him that he was looking forward to meeting Mundal because she had finally answered his texts after 6 months. And while he was going over to Mundal's apartment, he had already bought a teddy bear, and he was texting her and letting her know all his locations, and he was letting her know his estimated time of arrival. In this meantime, Mundal went to meet Harvinder Shokar, and his friend Darren Peters, she picked them up from the train station and she brought them over to her apartment, and she was constantly giving Harvinder Shokar Gagan's estimated time of arrival. The three of these people, Darren Peters, Mundal Mohel, and Harvinder Shokar, walk from the train station to Mundal's apartment, and and then they wait for Gagandeep to arrive. They sit around, they chat, they eat. Mundal apparently cooks both of these men a nice meal as well, and they either made a key lime pie, or on their way over to the apartment, they bought a key lime pie to eat. This will come in, this will be a little important a little bit later. At this time, all three of these individuals are sitting around, they're waiting, and finally, at this point, three of these people are waiting around, waiting for Gagandeep to arrive, and that's when Mundil actually asks two of her roommates, her flatmates, to just stay away from the basement that evening. And being good roommates, both of them say, absolutely, yeah, no problem. It appears that Mundil had tasked Harvinder Shokar to teaching, as I said earlier, Gagandeep a lesson, but it seems like she was unaware of the fact that Harvinder Shokar would be bringing Darren Peters. Nonetheless, all three of these people walked to her apartment. And Darren Peters had been hired to basically be like hired muscle for that evening. Once Gagandeep arrived at Mundal's house, she met him for a few moments, and then Harvinder Shokar emerged from the other room and he took over. Gagan was then ambushed and taken to the side room where both Harvinder Shokar and Darren Peters hit Gagandeep repeatedly and mercilessly. And because of this beating, he was soon rendered senseless and he fell unconscious. Now, you must be wondering, what did these people beat Gagandeep with? So it seems like they were beating him with anything and everything which was lying around. At one point, it seems like a camera tripod was also used to hit Gagandeep over the head. While this entire beating was going on, Gagandeep apparently kept calling Mundil's name and kept saying, Mundil, please make them stop. I'm so sorry, make them stop, make them stop. And he kept urging her to step in and stop the beating, but she never did. At this time, some newspapers say that Mundal was actually right outside within earshot, and she was sitting outside and eating a key lime pie, while Gagandeep was being beaten, and he eventually became unconscious because of the beating. Now, just so you know, the whole key lime pie, this is one detail that she does contest. She says, I was not eating while he was being beaten. So I thought I'll just let you know that. Nonetheless, it does seem that she was within earshot of this entire beating and she continued to ignore Gagandeep's pleas. Soon though, Gagandeep's voice ceased and he was carried out of Mundal Mohel's apartment, wrapped in a duvet, and he was placed in the boot of his own car. And this happened merely 20 minutes after he had first arrived. So remember, he came around 11 p.m. and by 11:20 he was beaten senseless and he was placed in the boot of his own car. However, at this point, he was unconscious and still alive. Now, one neighbor, in fact, noticed this whole situation, and the neighbor must have been a true crime fan, was so suspicious of this whole thing that the neighbor actually took down the details of the car, and the neighbor was able to tell the police later that he did think that somebody was being carried out. To him, it did look like a human-sized duvet that was being carried out by two people. So you would think that they put him in the boot of his car and he must have suffocated to death because of the lack of oxygen. However, that would probably be the more merciful way to go. What they did next was, it seems that Harvinder Shokar and Darren Peters poured petroleum all over this Mercedes and they set the car alight. And after that, these two cowards ran away from that scene. Since the car was set alight, Gagandeep was actually, in fact, burnt to death and he died because of toxic fume inhalation. His body was burnt to a crisp, a cinder, and of course, these people who had already beaten him and burnt him wouldn't walk away empty handed. They stole his credit cards, and of course, they helped themselves of Gagandeep's gold chain. All this time, Gagandeep's mom and Gagandeep's sister are blissfully unaware of what's going on. And this was around midnight. So these two women were at the home sleeping. They wouldn't have never ever thought of something like this happening to Gagandeep. However, at around 3 a.m., and by this time it was February 26th of 2011, the police knocked at their door and they had tracked down the home because the car which was on fire was actually Gagandeep's sister Amandeep's car. Woke them up and started asking Amandeep, who was driving the car, what had happened, so on and so forth. And at this point, they knew that there was a victim in the car, but because Gagandeep was already burnt beyond recognition, they didn't know who this person was. They also wanted to obtain some DNA from Amandeep and Tajinder Kaur so that they could check if the person within the boot of the car was in fact Gagandeep. This would have been too brutal, of course, to tell the mother and the daughter that they suspected that Gagandeep was the victim. And they, of course, did not tell the family all this. However, they did take a sample from Gagandeep's comb and his toothbrush. And as they were helping the police, as you can imagine, their hearts were sinking. And Gagandeep's little sister, of course, starts calling around all the friends that she knew. And she just wanted to know where Gagandeep had gone the night before. And all sorts of terrible scenarios were going through Tajinder Kaur, the mother's mind. And they were also, Amandeep, the sister, was also thinking of all these scenarios. Then one of the friends told Amandeep that Gagandeep had actually gone over to Mundil Muhel's apartment. When she answered the phone, Mandil completely denied everything. No, she said, of course I haven't seen him. But Amandeep pressed on. She knew Gagandeep had gone to see Mandil, and she confronted her. So, less than a minute later, Mundal changes her story, and now she admits, yes, Gagan was there, very briefly though, and then he left. But almost immediately after the call, Mundal disappeared. She ignored repeated calls from the police until finally, days later, she phoned in and said something to the effect of, I heard you're looking for me. What's the matter? What followed was the beginning of a complicated, high profile investigation. Charges were eventually drawn up: murder, manslaughter, and grievous bodily harm with intent. This was a formal case of homicide. The crime had occurred, remember, on February of 2011, but on December 6th of 2011, which is within the same year, the charges were finally filed and Harvinder Shokar, Mandal Mohel were still out on bail. You must be wondering, well, it's like India. Of course, you can apply for an anticipatory bail everywhere in the world. And yes, mostly you can apply for an anticipatory bail. In the UK, the system works differently. So there is no such thing as anticipatory bail. So no matter who the suspect is, you can expect to get two kinds of bails in the UK. One is where you're arrested and released on what's called a police bail. This happens before charges. However, then you have another kind of bail, which is released on court's bail, which happens once you've already been charged. So, if the court believes that someone might be a flight risk or a danger to society, they're remanded in custody until their case is called for trial in the courts. In this particular case, the court allowed bail to both Mundale and Harvinder Shokar. Although Darren, I'm not very sure. It seems like for a particular point of time after the charges were drawn up, he was in fact in jail, but both Mundil and Harvinder Shokar were definitely out. The trial began on December 6th of 2011 at no other place than the prestigious Old Bailey, London's Central Criminal Court. This was a packed courthouse. This was a packed courtroom. Media, family, and onlookers all waited with bated breath to see how this tragic case would untangle itself and unfold itself in the court of law. Opening arguments were made, witnesses were called, and evidence was laid bare. And 1 month later, in January of 2012, the jury delivered its final verdict. The verdicts were: Harvinder Shokar was found guilty of murder, Darren Peters was found guilty of manslaughter, and Mandal Muhel was found guilty of. Now, before we get into the actual sentences that these people got, let me give you a little bit of what the judge thought about these three particular defendants. In the case of Mandal, the judge, whose name is Judge Worsley, said, quote, "You lured Gagandeep to your student house in Brighton, knowing he would suffer serious harm," unquote. He later goes on to call her manipulative, vengeful, and deceitful. He later, in the same statement, goes on to say that she was a young woman who had a future in medicine and she sacrificed all of it. And the judge made it a point to highlight that she never went to help Gagandeep, even when she heard him cry out her name when he was being beaten. She didn't call 999. She didn't answer his pleas for help. She just sat outside while he was being assaulted. She watched him being driven away and she watched that he never returned. Similarly, when it came to Harvinder Shokar, Judge Worsley noted the following disturbing loyalty. He said, quote, "You were prepared to do whatever Mandal Muhil asked you, and more," unquote. The judge even made it a point in his sentencing. He goes back to one of the comments that Harvinder Shokar made to Mandal Muhil, and if you remember, you've been hearing this story, so you do remember. Perhaps this comment would stand out to you because he did say, quote, "I would do 21 years in jail for you," unquote. And the judge said that in his sentence. And then he goes on to even talk about Darren Peters. He says about the third co-accused that Peters had not helped with making the plan of the whole attack. He was not there for the premeditation part of it. However, he was present when injuries were inflicted. The judge recognized that Darren Peters did have a learning disability. He was easily manipulated and came from a broken family. Based on all this, so this is how the sentencing went. In March of 2012, almost 2 months after the jury had found all three of these people guilty, the judge revealed the following sentences. For Harvinder Shokar, the judge gave a year more than Harvinder Shokar was expecting. The judge gave him 22 years of rigorous imprisonment. To Darren Peters, for exactly the same crime, he was given 16 years in prison. And now, for the travesty of it all, Mandal Mohel was simply given 6 years in a youth offender institution. I know exactly what you're thinking, that how can she just be given 6 years when she clearly premeditated the whole crime? Well, let me make your blood boil a little more. Although she was given 6 years in jail, she only ended up serving 3 years in jail. And at the time of the sentencing, Mundal was 20 years old and she was placed in a youth offenders category, which is applied to all those who are under the age of 21. Harvinder Shokar was found to be the primary aggressor, so that's why he got 22 years. Peters had a sort of secondary role in all this, so he was given 16 years. And Mundal walked out of prison after merely 3 years. Then Mundal has had a lovely life ever since walking out of jail. Mundal, in fact, got married in the year 2016 to Virinder Singh Bola, who was a rising politician for the Labour Party. Their wedding at Medway Town's Gurdwara was followed by a lavish reception at Cobham Hall, which had at least 500 guests. Virinder, the husband, Mundal's husband, was later, in fact, elected as the mayor of Redbridge. However, when the media came to know about his wife's past, he had to step down shortly after her whole fiasco was resurfaced in the media. Today, Mundal Mohel is in fact a personal trainer, and she promotes things like aromatherapy. She even has her own YouTube channel. It wouldn't surprise you. It's not surreal anymore that this one-time convicted murderer is now somewhat of an influencer. The truth of the whole matter is that the killing of Gagandeep Singh isn't just a story of murder. It's a story of betrayal, jealousy, and twisted loyalties. So, as you know, that I will not be going into the psychological analysis of this whole case because I am, in fact, not a psychologist. I am a lawyer and a professor. So, I am more than happy to talk about the criminological implications and the legal analysis of this whole case. So let's start with the criminological theories, which can somehow make us understand even a little bit of why people like Mundal, people like Harvinder Shokar, and people like Darren Peters go on to kill somebody as lovely as Gagandeep Singh. So I think we can definitely start with the social learning theory by Albert Bandura. And the core idea is that in this theory basically is that people learn behavior by imitating others. They see people around them doing certain things which they deem acceptable, and this is where we can definitely apply this to the case of Harvinder Shokar, who may have internalized cues from Mandal Mohel and from others that violence was a perfectly acceptable way to deal with betrayal and to defend someone's quote unquote honor, right? That's exactly what seems to be the motivating part from his side. Of course, he was rather jealous of Gagandeep, that's clear as well. So it's the group dynamic of this whole thing which basically amplifies this even further. Because you would think that at least one of these three people would at some point have a flashbulb moment and probably would stop doing these things to Gagandeep, but unfortunately that never happens. So here we can apply something which we don't often apply in other criminal cases. Here we do have a case where three people perpetrated a crime together. So here we can definitely use Irving Janis's group think theory. Now, his core idea was that when individuals are in a tight knit group, they may make very irrational or unethical decisions just so that there is a harmony within the group and there's a conformity within that group, and they just want to maintain that. They want to maintain the status quo. And when we apply this to the case of the killing of Gagandeep Singh, we can definitely see that these trios may have developed a us versus him kind of mentality, and this helped them rationalize the extreme violence that they thought was a solution in taking care of Gagandeep. Um, in this case, it doesn't seem like there was any dissenting voice. You do remember that I did tell you that it's been alleged that while Gagandeep was being beaten to death, Mundal was sitting outside eating her nice key lime pie. So there was no dissenting voice out of these three. And nobody could basically stop this escalating plan once it was set in motion. This case also in sort of tells us about a core idea of another criminological theory, which is de-individuation, which says that in a group setting, individuals lose a sense of identity of their own, and they're morally less restrained, which leads them to being more sort of impulsive. They might do the kind of violent crimes they would have never thought of doing because the group sanctions it and then they do it. So here it definitely applies, especially in the moments when Gagandeep was sort of attacked and later burnt alive. And the brutality of Shokar and Peters and the absolute apathy of Mundal Mohel can only be explained with theories like this. We can also, of course, as I always say, always apply strain theory. Strain theory can be applied here because it does seem like, and it especially applies to Harvinder Shokar, because Harvinder Shokar around him saw people who were rather successful in the Sikh community. And on top of it, he's being helped by the one person who, by the time he was 21, Gagandeep was already a self made millionaire. So In the mind of Harvinder Shokar, he wants to achieve that socially acceptable goal of sort of a certain status, and he resorts to this deviant method to undercut all the success of Gagandeep Singh by killing him. And Mundil may have felt a sense of sort of betrayal or humiliation because of Gagandeep. There is this allegation that I did tell you about of a possible rape, and she channeled this emotional strain into a violent plan which simmered inside of her for approximately 6 months. And that was her way to sort of regain control of this whole situation. We can, of course, always apply neutralization theory. And the core idea in neutralization theory is that offenders often neutralize a situation, they rationalize why they're doing something because A, they can deny injury, B, they usually deny victimhood. Three, they deny, usually they, number three, they usually tend to bring in appeal to a higher loyalty. Now, the way it applies in this case is the denial of injury would be something like, at least in the mind of Darren Peters, he would say something like, well, I didn't plan to kill him. Okay, it just got out of hand. In the case of Mundil, she would say something like, inside her mind, she would say something like, well, he deserved what he got because of what he did to me. So she's denying his victimhood. Another thing is for Harvinder Shokar, this especially applies where he wants to show a higher loyalty towards this woman that he idolizes and he loves. And he thinks that Gagandeep has come in the middle of the love of his life and himself. So for him, he's appealing to a higher loyalty that I want to bring this woman's honor back and be her knight in shining armor. So this would explain why he would do such a thing. Um, Here, in terms of Harvinder Shokar, it does seem like there is a sense of like honor culture where in some cultures and in some belief systems around the world, it is thought that protecting a woman's honor is sort of like the ultimate way of avenging a perceived sexual transgression on the part of whoever the person is. And in this case, it was Gagandeep. There's a perceived sexual aggression on his part, and the justification of his killing lies in the fact that he got into bed with Mundil Mohel. At least in the minds of these two perpetrators, Darren, I don't think even knew what he was getting himself into. He was just the hired muscle at that point. So this definitely applies with Harvinder Shokar, who reportedly did say that I am willing to go to jail for you for 21 years. And he finally sees this moment of chivalry where he can step up. He also sees this maybe as a cultural obligation. As a man, he needs to step up. And of course, this is wrapped in his perverse sense of masculinity. So there is one more theory that I'll close with, but according to me, it does apply here. If you disagree, please let me know. I think we can definitely apply something which is called betrayal trauma theory. And the core idea there is that when trauma is caused by someone you actually trust, like a friend or a romantic partner, it often leads to a more intense sense of psychological harm. And in reverse, betrayal can motivate such aggression that one can't possibly perceive in real life, right? So, in the case of Mundil, she felt this intense sense of betrayal from Gagandeep. Whether it was real or imagined, we don't really know. Where she thought that vengeance was hers, and it's because of all these ideas which were swirling in her head for 6 months that they basically came to a head in the killing of Gagandeep Singh. So, this is where we stop with the case of the killing of Gagandeep Singh. As you know by now, Harvinder Shokar is still in prison, so is Darren Peters. However, Mundil Mohel is out free in the world. She's living her life in the UK. Well, to Gagandeep's mother and sister, we can give so much more than just our thoughts and prayers. We can give them our collective vigilance. I would love to know what you think about this case. And did you think that I got all the criminological theories right? If you disagree or if you agree, please let me know in the comments below. Until I see you again, stay collectively vigilant.